All right, Alexander, let's talk about the Lincoln Project, which was just a clever rebrand of a few neocon guys who wanted to get rid of Trump. And, these guys are, you know, what can you say about these guys? Neocons, scumbags from the beginning to the end, and this should come as no surprise that the entire organization is falling apart. Tucker Carlson did a segment last week on the Lincoln Project, and obviously he had nothing good to say about these guys. But he made a note that these guys, 212 days to the day of Abraham Lincoln's birthday, was the exact day when these guys blew apart. So 212 years later since Lincoln's birth. And a huge scandal hit the Lincoln Project. Much of it revolves around this guy, one of their founders and one of their leaders, this guy Weaver, John Weaver, who was a political operative for John McCain. It should be of no surprise there. And, he was doing some terrible stuff with young boys. The scandal is not only that, not only was he doing terrible stuff with young boys, which seems to be now par for the course in DC and Hollywood, sadly enough. But his partners in Lincoln Capital, they appear to have known about this. We have a lot of documentation, and there's a lot of stuff that has come out which show that his partners knew about this, or at the very least, they just kind of turned a blind eye to what was going on. One of the founders also resigned, Steve Schmidt, he resigned. He played the victim while he resigned, which is interesting, but nonetheless, he resigned. These guys were on MSNBC and CNN and all the mainstream media all the way through the elections with the goal of getting rid of Trump. The other scandal in all of this is that, from what we understand, this was pretty much well known in DC as well, what John Weaver was up to. It appears that the media also knew what was going on. I believe the media knew what was going on. I believe DC knew what was going on. But I think they also turned a blind eye to everything because they all had one goal in mind, and that was to remove Trump. And these guys helped serve that purpose. And the minute that they got Biden into the White House, well, they just, got rid of these guys. They didn't need them anymore. And now I guess we're able to discuss this story, or at least now we have the facts about this story, and we're able to report on it. But these guys were a bad bunch from the get-go. Like I said, they've been on Bill Maher, CNN, MSNBC, all over the place. It's worth noting that Kellyanne Conway, who was in the Trump administration, her husband was also in this group, and Kellyanne Conway resigned. I'm not sure if she resigned before or after the election, but she resigned from the Trump White House. I wonder if she knew what was about to go down. But her husband was in this group, and they never hid that they had different political viewpoints. But that's not a good thing. We also have breaking news, that some of their donors included people like Mitt Romney and Bain Capital. So Romney's Bain Capital, Romney's Bain Capital was a donor, as well as the China-linked Sequoia Capital as well. What else? Cindy McCain came out with a statement saying that her father never liked Weaver, and he never wanted anything to do with him. Okay, so everyone's trying to run for cover now that this story is out in the open. But the real scandal in all of this is that during the election, everyone, I believe everyone knew, everyone inside of Lincoln Capital knew, Lincoln Project knew, the media I'm sure knew, all of DC knew, but they kept all of this under wraps until after the election, and now the whole story's blown apart, and the Lincoln Project has been blown apart. Neocons should come as no surprise. These guys are just absolute scumbags.
Yeah. It's fascinating to see how they all now say that they didn't know what John Weaver was up to. George Conway, whom you mentioned, Kellyanne Conway's husband, he says, he didn't really know John very well. I frankly only spoke to him a couple of times on the phone early on in the Lincoln Project. That's what he said. That's what George Conway said, except, of course, that he's a co-founder of the Lincoln Project with Weaver, and the two co-wrote a New York Times op-ed together. So this is the guy. This is the guy that George Conway says he didn't know very well. Well, first of all, Washington is a small place. Everybody knows a great deal about everybody else. It beggars belief that this kind of thing that Weaver was doing, and of course we must stress, I mean, he's obviously entitled to whatever defense he has, but it's beggars belief that people didn't know that he had an alternative life. Let's leave it there, but let's also point out as well that there's all these enormous donations that were coming in, flowing in, apparently $80 million going into the election, much of it unaccounted for or going into accounts which are controlled by the individuals who formed this project. Some of it apparently paid to make a film which has never appeared, and there's no indication of when this film will ever appear. And there we are, an extraordinary project given an enormous amount of attention. They were all the time on, on CNN, on MSNBC. They were interviewed together. I mean, there was another one, a man called Wilson, who also now says that he didn't really know Weaver very well, except they appeared together. I think it was on MSNBC's 60 Minutes. I mean, the two of them were together on that show. And they were all over the place. And they weren't just all over the place. You described these people, I think, very accurately. They were tough, aggressive Washington insiders and dedicated neocons. They were absolutely a hit team put together in order to take down Donald Trump. And they were advertising all over the place, and they were appearing on the media all over the place, and they were active, giving this impression that Donald Trump didn't speak for the Republican Party, when in fact, as we know, in the election, Donald Trump won more votes for the Republican Party than any other Republican Party candidate in the party's history. So the whole thing was a sham and a hoax from beginning to end. But quite apart from Weaver's activities, which are still under investigation, and we will see what comes of those, quite apart from all the financial irregularities, there's the sort of things that these people were up to. Not only incredibly aggressive and abusive commentaries about Donald Trump, some of which were frankly, absolutely and utterly shocking, but also a systematic campaign to pressurize Donald Trump's lawyers during the election and after the election and during all the election disputes, leading at least one law firm, causing at least one law firm, one big, large, respectable law firm, to pull out of acting for Donald Trump, which of course reduced his legal firepower at a critical moment in all the election litigation. And of course a pressure campaign which has been taken up by others and which still continues. And we've just seen that Donald Trump's lawyers, the ones who represented him in the impeachment, are coming under the same kind of pressure. One's had his house vandalized and says that his family and his law firm in Philadelphia are under siege. And of course, I'm glad you bring up the topic of Lincoln's birthday, the fact that, it was 212 years since Abraham Lincoln's birth, that this so-called Lincoln Project unraveled. Because I, of course, am familiar with Abraham Lincoln because I studied him carefully when I was at university. I read all his speeches, all of them, even those that he wrote long before he became president. And I can say a few things about Lincoln. Firstly, he was an exceptionally polite man. He absorbed lots of abuse. He never engaged in it. He avoided making personal attacks against his opponents. In fact, he never did make personal attacks against his opponents. He went out of his way to work with people and to build bridges with them. Completely the opposite of what these people have been doing. Lincoln was, of course, a lawyer himself. He acted for difficult and unpopular clients during his work as a lawyer. He'd have been shocked and appalled and considered it totally un-American that people who invoke his name would be party to campaigns against lawyers to pressure them not to represent people in cases. And last but not least, you correctly say that these people were associated, one of them was associated with Senator McCain. all of them are ardent neocons, fervid supporters of campaigns to instigate regime change, involve the United States in conflicts and wars all around the world. That seems to have been their principal grievance against Donald Trump. Of course, Lincoln was opposed to the United States getting involved in foreign wars. He made that very clear. He opposed the Mexican War. He opposed all the schemes that others hatched to involve the United States in wars with other countries. In his very last inaugural address, his second inaugural address, he spoke of the United States seeking peace with itself and with other nations. These people do not seek peace within the United States, and they absolutely do not seek peace with other nations. So it's a complete abuse of Abraham Lincoln's name. And of course, you're absolutely right. The whole of Washington knew what they were up to. The whole of Washington applauded them as they were doing what they were doing. They were getting all the prime spots on US television networks, and nobody said a word about the campaign they were launching to deprive Donald Trump of legal representation.
Yeah, these guys spit on Lincoln. They spit on America. They're just absolute scumbags. I mean, I just don't have anything to say about these guys anymore. I'm just tired of all these guys. The FBI is now investigating this guy Weaver. We'll see if something comes out of it. I mean, we've gone through Epstein, we've gone through Ghislaine Maxwell, we've gone through Bill Clinton. I mean, it's just a never-ending story, isn't it? There's also Hollywood. There's also a big Hollywood donated a lot to these guys as well, by the way. Big surprise there, Harvey Weinstein. It just doesn't end. This really just does not end. And
no, and of course, you missed out Hunter Biden. Remember him? I mean, the investigation of him that the FBI is supposed to be conducting, which apparently isn't leading anywhere. And there've been some allegations.
But Trump's the racist, right? Yeah. Okay.
Of course, absolutely, exactly.
This is the problem that I have. This is the problem that I have with the left, the neoliberal left, whatever you want to call it. It's always the ends justify the means. They don't care who they destroy. They don't care even if it's children. They just don't care, as long as they get what they want. And that is the fundamental problem to their ideology. They don't give a damn about the lives, the people that they destroy, even if it's the most innocent of people, as long as they get what they wanted. In this case, it was getting Trump out of the White House. And God knows how many children's lives they destroyed by turning a blind eye to what Weaver was doing. And that, I think, is the real story that no one will ever talk about. The fact that all of DC and all of the mainstream media knew what these guys were up to. You said it. He was on MSNBC, CNN, not one time, not two times, not three times, a gazillion times. He was on Bill Maher's show. He was on all of their shows, HBO, you name it. These guys were on that show, and they were virtue signaling how good of a people they are, how virtuous they are, and how bad Trump is. And now look at what we find out. But no one is going to report on that. No one's going to say anything, and they're just going to forget about it. They're going to continue with Orange Man bad. These guys are. I'm so sick of this crap.
Well, I completely agree. I mean, there was a very good, very sad article by Jonathan Turley, who's of course a lawyer and a professor of law, and he made exactly the point you've made: how all of these principles that the United States stands for, due process, a presumption of innocence, careful consideration of evidence, the rights of the accused, how all of that is being thrown away, how we're having bizarre theories constantly floated. And, this hasn't been just over the impeachment. It goes all the way back to the moment when he first announced that he was going to be a serious presidential candidate. And, I mean, remember the emoluments clause? Remember all of that business? Remember all of the other things that we've heard so much about? And it's been this constant scorched earth approach, policy, that what calls itself the left in the United States, but what is really one part of the American swamp, has followed in order to try and obliterate Donald Trump. We've just been through a sham impeachment. We've just been through this across the board closure of free speech on social media and on the internet. We've seen, as I said, a ludicrous impeachment coming after a previous ludicrous impeachment. We've seen an extraordinary investigation of Donald Trump organized by the security services, which the Director General, the Inspector General of the FBI, Michael Horowitz, has absolutely exposed as being completely carried out completely without any concern for due process or correct procedure. We've seen all of this, and now we see this Lincoln Project receiving tens of millions of dollars, being rewarded by all kinds of, primetime spots on US television, its leaders, its members, promoted and hailed, and these are the real, true, decent Republicans, the ones who are standing up against this terrible orange man. And yet we now discover a bunch of grifters. That's what Greenwald calls them, and one of them, John Weaver, the subject of investigation apparently by the FBI for misconduct, which of course everybody would have known about. I'm going to give him, by the way, that benefit of due process, which the left does not extend to others. I'm going to see and wait until the case against him has been decided, assuming, of course, it is ever brought, which I wonder, before I give a final view, because that is the American way. That is the truly democratic way. That is what the United States stood for, and for so many people around the world still stands for. That is what made it the shining city on the hill that Ronald Reagan and one of the Pilgrim Fathers once spoke about. Well, that shining city is looking very tarnished now, and you only have to look at the Lincoln Project to understand why.
Yeah. I think in the beginning of the video, I said Cindy McCain when I mentioned that she was trying to distance herself from Weaver. I actually meant Meghan McCain, John McCain's daughter. She's the one that's trying to distance herself from Weaver. It says a lot when you have the McCains actually looking good compared to this guy. I mean, that speaks volumes right there. I mean,
quite. I mean, it's incredible that these people were ever taken seriously, quite apart from their backgrounds, quite apart from the kind of people they were. I mean, they're not even in themselves significant politicians. I mean, we know what Romney is. I mean, we know all those people. But these characters were sort of backwards wire pullers behind the scenes, total swamp creatures. And yet, some people were treating them as the true voice of the true Republican Party, disregarding the 75 million people who voted for Donald Trump, who has won more votes in that election than any Republican in the party's and the nation's history. I mean, it tells you so much about the present problems of the United States and why so many people in the United States are so unhappy.
No, what it tells you is that, people like McConnell and like Romney, they like these guys like Weaver
absolutely.
and Schmidt and Wilson, and they turn their backs on good, decent Americans who supported Trump because they wanted a better life for themselves and their family and their country.
Well,
but for Romney and for all these guys, they spit on the decent Americans, and they love these disgusting, degenerate swamp creatures, and that is what they are. In a normal society, these guys would go to trial right away. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we are talking about a society now, and we've done how many stories on this, from Epstein to Ghislaine to Harvey Weinstein. We're talking about a society that is, I mean, with each passing year, it's becoming more accepting of pedophilia and abuse. It really is, and at an elite level, and it's obvious. We're seeing it, but Hollywood gave these guys money. Bain Capital gave these guys money. They were on every TV show. They were praised by everyone. I mean, it's spiraling out of control. Yes. It is spiraling out of control, and it just speaks volumes as to how, in what a terrible state the DC swamp, the nation's capital, is at this moment in time. What a terrible state it is at this moment in time.
I completely agree. And can I just say, I'm glad you brought up the subject of McConnell, because, of course, we all remember this extraordinary tirade he made on Saturday against Donald Trump on the after the impeachment vote. I mean, it's sort of utterly bizarre rant, which we've already talked about. But consider what McConnell said about the Lincoln Project, which, of course, was setting itself up as the true, authentic voice of the Republican Party. What did McConnell say about them? What, in fact, has he said about them? What has he said about them as they've engaged in all of these malpractices, as they've pressurized lawyers representing a Republican president, as they've pressurized all sorts of other people and abused all sorts of people around the country who support that Republican candidate, as in fact they have campaigned for the Republican candidate, not just Donald Trump, but Republican candidates up and down the country, to lose. What has McConnell said about them? He said nothing. He has said absolutely nothing that I know about them. He's not come out, he's not denounced them, he didn't call them in at the time of the election, he didn't say these people do not speak for the Republican Party, they're not Republicans in any way that I recognise. All Republicans should support Republican candidates and should have nothing to do with the with the Lincoln Project, which does not speak for Republicans but speaks only for itself. McConnell did nothing. But when it comes to Donald Trump, well, we see what he has to say, even after he's voted to acquit him. Now, if that doesn't tell you about the problems in the United States, what does?
Yeah, I remember Leslie Stahl did a puff piece on 60 Minutes with these guys, propped them up as these guys were the real Republicans. Remember the piece that she tried to do on Trump, where she attacks Trump, 60 Minutes attacks Trump, but they prop these guys up.
I believe that was the one that Weaver was on, but anyway, I may be wrong.
Yeah, that was the one where all these guys were on. Weaver, all of them.
Exactly.
It was a complete fluff piece. Complete fluff piece.
Absolutely. Even as these people, even if you didn't know, which I mean, I'm sure lots of people know, but even if you didn't know about the kind of things Weaver was doing, in his inverted commas private life, not that it was really private, but that's another story. The fact that these characters were out and about putting pressure on lawyers, that is public knowledge. They bragged about it, and yet nonetheless they were being praised. I mean, it is so appalling. It is so shocking that, for once, even I am almost at a loss for words. I find it very difficult to express simply and clearly my own feelings about this matter, because I'm so upset and shocked by it. And Abraham Lincoln, poor man, he would be spinning in his grave to see his party and his name being used in this way.
And his nation.
Which he struggled so hard to build. I mean, government of the people, by the people, for the people. All those things that he said. I mean, I used to know large parts of the things that Lincoln, said. I used to remember them because he spoke so eloquently and so well, and with such calm and such consideration for his opponents. And yet now we see the way in which his name is being twisted and abused for purposes diametrically opposite to those he stood for.
Yeah. Anyway, no one knew what Harvey Weinstein was up to. No one knew what Epstein was up to. No one knew what Maxwell was up to.
Of course,
no one knew anything about anybody. No one knew what Weaver was up to. It's the same damn story over and over again.
Oh, absolutely.
Anyway, we'll leave it there. They're good riddance. I hope in any of these cases that we've been covering over and over again, which is now becoming a common occurrence, sadly, a common occurrence. A country can't survive this. A society can't survive this.
No.
But let's hope that some justice comes somewhere.
I
Honestly,
agree.
somewhere.
I do. I hope so too. I mean,
All right.
I'm not prepared to give up. I mean, at the moment, I still have hopes that something will come. But of course, you know, I've waited for that for some time now, and it still hasn't happened. But we will see.
We'll see. I'm getting more black pilled with each passing day. Anyway, we'll leave it there. All right, guys. Take care.